stocks, bonds, ETFs, straight out of downtown Chicago. This is Zach's Market Edge.
Welcome to Zach's Market Edge, the podcast about investing in your life. I'm your host, Tracy Reineck, and this week I'm joined by Zach's senior strategist, Kevin Cook, to discuss the Internet of Things. We haven't done a show on this topic in quite some time, much to my amazement. I'm kind of surprised, and a lot is going on now. The Internet of Things isn't some far-off fantasy anymore. It's actually here. We have, Google Home, we have the Echo, the Nest is out there programming our thermostats, and you can program like your window shades now to go up and down if you're at work and all of that stuff. But there's beginning to be a few more interesting stories out there that we've been noticing here at Zach's about the smart technology in your home, and mainly about security and privacy. I feel are going to be the two big stories going forward here. So recently we were talking here in the office because the Chicago Tribune had a story by Ali Maradi. I'm saying that probably wrong. She's a reporter here at the Chicago Tribune in Chicago, and it's a story about how a suburban Chicago family had baby monitors in their bedroom for their babies, around the crib. They have a 7-month-old, so they just wanted to monitor them. And then one day, walking right outside the room, they heard this deep male voice coming through the monitor there. And they got a little scared. They busted into the room, and then the voice stopped. So they get their baby out of the crib there, get out of the room. Then they noticed on their Nest thermostat that it had suddenly risen to 90 degrees, and it had previously been at 72 degrees. They hadn't changed anything. And then they had voices coming out of the security cameras in the other part of their house. This could be like a horror movie type of thing or something, just not with ghosts, but with your smart devices. And then they started talking to the guy through the cameras, and then they realized that their Nest cameras and thermostat had been hacked. And so now they're in the story talking about how super scared they were, how creepy it was. Yes, it would be creepy to hear these crazy voices coming out, and they were swearing at them on top of it. And then they know that they've been watching you and your child in your house. That was all super scary, but they aren't alone. Apparently, according to the article, there's been some other complaints of Nest hackings. And Google, which owns Nest, has said it's not their problem. It's not their fault. It's the fault of having other devices on some kind of network with the Nest on there. And somehow the hackers can get in. The more you have all tied together, the more backdoors basically there are for the hackers to get in there. Also, a lot of customers, I found this out, Kevin, are not updating their software. It's not updating. They're not updating the security behind the scenes, and they are not updating passwords, things we have to do on all these other devices to keep security. So suddenly I got a little freaked out about the smart devices. I don't own any of this stuff. I'm back in the Stone Age with all of this, but it's stories like these that freak me out.
Yeah, when you told me this story last week, we share all kinds of news stories in the office, right? Out loud and stuff. So you said, and I said, you know what, Tracy, we have to do a podcast on AI again. Yeah. Because this all ties in. And especially because I had just bought a company that specializes in big data, which uses the cloud, of course, but they can go to what they call the edge of the internet and have AI applications at the edge, which means it's not always connected to the internet. And I thought, well, that's got to be a benefit, and that's got to be a direction this has to go. Because you were just talking about updating, the software or the security and all this stuff. Yeah. Imagine all the stuff. You could spend your whole day updating everything with all the security patches, and you'd go crazy.
Yeah, and then on the flip side of that, we have the Google owning Nest, and they are used to doing these kind of security updates, sending them out, patching, finding the vulnerabilities, fixing it, all of that stuff. But what about the makers of like some of these appliances?
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's just say, I'm just throwing this out there, but you bought like a Kenmore refrigerator that was a smart refrigerator. Those kind of manufacturers aren't used to, hey, we need to be, sending out updates to our customers. Usually they just sell the refrigerator to you and it's like, bye, call us if you need maintenance.
Yeah, there's so many layers now. I mean,
Yeah.
you're talking about there's the semiconductor chips, there's the software, the carrier is involved, whether it's AT&T or Verizon, right, in some way, and then the appliance maker. So
Right.
I'm surprised that you said that Google has, in some ways, claimed non-responsibility.
Yeah.
Because I'm hoping that the big players here, like a Google, Microsoft, Amazon, can step up and say, we need industry standards here. We need to protect consumers.
Right.
And because if they don't do it, what's the incentive for a smaller company to take
Right.
responsibility?
Right. But you just laid out like who is going to be responsible. Let's say, my refrigerator is hacked somehow. I don't know why they would do that, but there must be some reason. Maybe they want to ruin all my food, or I have a disgruntled, who knows what. And they hack in there and they turn off my refrigerator and all my food is spoiled. Will it be the manufacturer because they didn't send me like some kind of update that would have stopped the hacking? Is it the semiconductor? Like who, or am I signing away all the rights when I purchase it to ask for compensation for this? Like, I don't know. Like that's a whole nother podcast almost.
I got to tell you a few stories. Remember yesterday, I almost canceled my appearance on your podcast here because
You did.
I had other things going on. But then I realized so much was happening. Like you told me this story last week about the Chicago family getting de-nested by the 17 devices in their house and having weird voices. And they basically got found ghosts.
Yeah.
Well, then I had an interesting weekend, and so much is happening. So over the weekend, I sent out a couple of tweets because I'm always following people that are involved in AI, big data, and the Internet of Things. And you know who Seth Godin is. He's sort of, old
He's
Silicon
a marketing
Valley.
guru.
Yeah, now he's a marketing guy, but he has this, he looks at the waves of technology, and he sent out a tweet over the weekend. He said, based on what I'm seeing in the next wave of technology, mediocre lawyers and mediocre doctors will become obsolete because of AI.
Okay.
So, this is a trend. And then and people reacted to that, and a lot of people were like, "No, that's not true. You can't, AI can't replace lawyers and doctors." Well, he said mediocre ones. So. And then the other tweet I retweeted something. It was an image of a robotic hedge trimmer, which was being used in a large agricultural field and was very precise about how it went through and basically trimmed these plants. And I took that and I tweeted it out. I said, this is a model of what AI can do with concepts too. And so it is possible that smart systems can take over a lot of work functions. Well, people got excited about that and said, no, that's not going to happen. So this was all over the weekend. And then on Monday, what do we get? The White House announces their new AI initiative. It seems like a no-brainer. Obviously, there's technology voices have the White House's ear, have the president's ear, and maybe Jared Kushner. That we need to be on the advanced guard of technology, especially since China is
right
to keep. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
And then just this morning, Bloomberg publishes a story very similar to the one that you talked about in the Tribune, and maybe they even quote. I haven't read it, but the title of the article is "Your Smart Light Can Tell Amazon and Google When You Go to Bed."
Uh-oh. See, this is what freaks me out.
Yeah, and then there's the little sub-explanation here is, after you connect a light fixture to Alexa, Amazon wants to know every time the light is turned on or off. Now, why, in one sense, Amazon and Google are going to collect data just because they can, and they have the capability to store and analyze it. Now, it doesn't mean that they're always tracking you, although you might have something to say about that. But it's also what they, if they just want to use the data in an anonymous sense, like they're just tracking the population. What do different people do in different parts of the country at different times of the day? And then they can run that through all kinds of behavior analytics and basically create new ideas, a model of the consumer and then new ways to sell them stuff. You know, can I sell you something at 3:00 in the morning?
Right. Exactly.
So
Now, I did read that Amazon, they just announced that they bought this company called Eero, EERO is the name, and they're smart routers. And so they basically, it knows, I saw one article that said that it knows every make and model of every gadget in your house because it's attached to all the smart devices that you have. So a lot of people who use the Eero and who loved it are kind of outraged because it's Amazon buying it and they were trying to avoid the Alexa and all this other stuff, the Echo, all this. And now here's Amazon. Now they had a pretty tight privacy policy with this router, apparently, where they claimed they were not collecting the data on it. And so Amazon has already said, we will honor that policy. We will not be collecting data off of this. But that's just what they're saying now. It doesn't mean that that's always going to be the case with this. But that brings up a whole nother question, too, because here we are on this podcast basically just talking about Google, Amazon. These are the big, big tech companies. And now they're buying out like this Eero. These small guys get bought out. Even Nest, that was bought out by Google. And where does that leave us as consumers? We are basically beholden to 5 or 6 big companies. That's it.
I think that it's going to come to a head here where they're going to have to create explicit permission policies.
Yeah.
You know, Facebook already had its crisis. Apple didn't have a crisis, but they did about a year ago come out and admit we recognize that teens can become addicted to smartphones or even preteens.
Yeah.
So and these are the companies that have to take responsibility to do more research and to have more warnings, more permissions. Like, you know, here's how to use your phone so that you can decide what's being tracked, right?
Right.
So I think that Google, Amazon, and Microsoft also have a responsibility to create policies to you know, inform consumers and then make a lot more stuff permissioned. You know, let the consumer decide how do I want to be tracked? How am I being tracked? How do I turn it off? Et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I read a stat that said 40% of the usage on the speakers like the Amazon Echo and Google Home are used to connect everything else in the house. They're not just for me asking, you know, what's the weather like today or that stuff. 40% is used to connect. So these devices are basically gathering data on like everything that's
And you were just telling
on.
me a story this morning about a woman who wanted to see if she could get Amazon out of her life, right?
Yeah.
How did that go?
Well, not good because you forget AWS is the cloud, you know, company, and tons of big businesses use AWS, including like Netflix and Spotify, to store their data. So Amazon technically does know everything I'm watching on my Netflix.
Right. And
technically,
she was able to track, you know, thousands of IP addresses.
Yeah.
But then she was able to find out that she was still connected to the World Wide Web, whether she wanted to be or not.
Yeah. So as an investor, are these what is the tactic I have to take if I wanted to invest in this area, other than a company that might be coming out with a smart refrigerator or something like that? Is it just mainly these big, who are the big tech guys?
You know what? I'm going to tell you. So over 2 years ago, in the spring of 2016, I set out to study big data, AI, Internet of Things, and automation because I saw that these trends were obviously just nonstop, and I wanted to pick stocks for investors. And I looked at a lot of companies, and I said, in the end, you just have to buy the big ones,
Okay.
because they're going to control the space.
That's what we're seeing.
And Amazon and Google, they're buying up small companies. Google has, you know, they have their own venture capital arm with hundreds of portfolio companies. So they already know what's coming. You know,
Right.
they're seeding these companies after they get handed off from venture capital. So Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and IBM. I said, you have to buy those 4 if you want to be involved in, you know, if you want to have investment exposure to big data, AI, Internet of Things, and automation.
Okay, IBM is one that I don't hear that often.
Right, but you know, it's funny. This week, IBM is having a big conference in San Francisco. They call it IBM Think or Think IBM or something, and it starts started today, and it goes through the week here in San Francisco. They're going to be relevant.
Okay.
When I was studying this a couple years ago, I thought the coolest examples of what was happening with AI and big data were the universities and teams that set out to beat the hardest games in the world, like Texas Hold'em poker and the Chinese game Go, which is like elaborately more complex than chess.
Okay.
And this is where machine learning and deep learning comes in. Machine learning is, teaching a machine to study data, whether it's encoded or it's visual, and then to learn from it, to spot the patterns. And then deep learning gets more complicated with layers and layers and nodes of information. It's why NVDA is those chips are so powerful, because they can do parallel processing. Well, IBM has always been right there with it. They've been an NVIDIA partner, so that's why I still like IBM. I don't know if they have the earnings power, but you have to pay attention to what IBM is doing in terms of the research powerhouse that they are.
Yeah.
So, machine learning and deep learning are like the toys that the data engineers and scientists play with, to figure out what do we do with data. And obviously, for us, as consumers with an Alexa or a Google Home, we just want to know what's being recorded, what's being tracked, that kind of thing. But one of the smaller companies I sort of teased it earlier that I'm investing in is called Cloudera.
Okay.
And
what's the ticker? CLDR is
yes.
the ticker with that one.
And they've been around for a while. They specialize in big data languages. So they teach a company, here's how to process your data, and here's how to store it, here's how to analyze it, here's how to make use of it and monetize it if you can. And but they're dealing with companies that want to be able to do artificial intelligence and machine learning where you're not always connected to the internet. So that and I'll give you a really simple example. This is a simple example of edge AI. Let's say that an elderly person wears a monitor that monitors whether or not they fall down. Let's say you're talking about
I've seen those.
an 80-year-old person.
Yeah.
Well, what if you don't want that to be connected to the internet all the time? Can the device be smart enough with embedded AI that it can tell when a person has fallen and then connect to the internet and call somebody?
Okay.
And so that's a real simple example of edge AI.
Yeah.
But, I think that, look how we adapted to Google and Facebook always knowing what we're doing online, right?
Most of us blow it off. We're like, oh, well,
we just
too bad.
adapt because technology is moving so fast.
Yeah.
And so we adapt to tech that gets embedded in our life. And we know it's unstoppable.
Right.
I mean, because of the nature of innovation and creativity, there's always some scientist out there creating something new, or an engineer, and it will find its way into a marketplace if somebody can make money off of it. So, we have to be proactive, but it is hard to keep up with all this stuff.
Right.
And I'm hopeful that the big players, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, will come up with policies to help people and be able to turn on and off the switch, and not feel like they're being tracked all the time.
So I saw Microsoft announced actually that they're spending $5 billion over the next 4 years on the Internet of Things.
Okay.
And a lot of that, it sounds like it's going to be done through partnerships, which makes sense too. They have the money. They go to these small startups and say, hey, we'll fund you as kind of like a VC type of venture to get some of these new companies that need the cash. But they have the name behind them in the Microsoft name. So
which is, like I said, Google has a big VC arm, and that's what they do because it's a way for them to constantly be exposed to the freshest ideas from innovative engineers and entrepreneurs out there. And then if they want to buy the technology, it's halfway already in-house.
Right. Now, what about a company like GE Digital? This is like one of the subunits of GE right now, but it is going to be spun off, and they do a lot of industrial Internet of Things. So not so much for the home, but more the industrial side. but they're going to get a new name and all that stuff. So I feel like as an investor, I should wait until that's spun off and then kind of see what happens. Because I don't like the big GE right now, personally.
Yeah. When I thought about this 3 years ago, and I asked myself, okay, who is going to dominate in the robotics of the factory?
Yeah.
Like, it might be simple just to say, well, GE's got to be involved somehow. But look at how Amazon just leaps over everybody.
Yeah.
So I knew that Amazon, with their warehouses, they're going to figure out a way, bottom up, invent their own robotic systems, and they'll probably be awesome. So, and whether or not they turn around and then they become their own mini GE selling industrial automation,
right,
is a possibility.
Right,
so
for sure.
you would think that GE would still be, its legacy tech, sort of like IBM, that they would still have, a driving power in R&D, especially industrial R&D. But yeah, let's wait for that spinoff and see what happens.
Okay. I don't know when that's going to be, but they're doing a lot of different spinoffs and things over there right now.
I shared that one graphic with you from this is a consulting company in the UK called Frost & Sullivan, and they do a lot of work here in these technology areas that we're talking about. And this is a graphic a couple years old, but they were forecasting that that when you say smart technology and smart cities, it encompasses so many things. It could be transportation, it could be healthcare, it could be education, and they see it as nearly a $2 trillion market by 2020. With all the interconnected technologies. So this is a pretty good example of how you can't get away from it, because and by our worst fears, some things are already happening in China that we would never want here, and that's millions of security cameras in major cities watching people.
Right.
And there's even been stories about cameras recording people's facial expressions and then monitoring behavior that way.
Right.
That's not going to happen here. But to what extent could things be happening that we don't know about?
Right. Yeah, that's a whole nother. I'm just still scared about the Nest and the cameras monitoring.
You're not getting one anytime soon.
No, and I don't have any of the Alexas, the Echo. I have none of those things.
And we don't even know, like, in any given office building, can they just have cameras everywhere monitoring people, or that's
a good question.
The municipalities, state, city, federal, can they have cameras on every street corner?
A lot of them do already.
Yeah.
Nobody's challenged that.
Yeah. So, the legal side of it is, well, the government's just going to do it anyway, and we can say it's a safety matter. Only the police have access to it. It's to watch for traffic accidents or crime or whatever.
Yeah.
But that seems like it could be a slippery slope.
Well, remember when Google was initially doing Google Maps, when they literally drove around with the video cameras to get the street views?
Uh-huh.
And people were pretty upset about that, because some people were just outside lounging in their yard or whatever when they drove by, and now suddenly they're enshrined on the Google Map. And or people did not want their house on there that way.
Like what's in your backyard.
On the internet. Yeah. So but now people are over that.
They can see I didn't fix my pool this year.
Well, yeah. But kind of the way that, we got over Facebook and some of those privacy issues, the same thing happened with Google Maps. I don't ever hear anybody talking about it anymore. Mm-hmm. And that product has been around for many years, the actual, Street View. And people get upset if their area does not have a Google Street Map thing. So,
and I just, before I describe this sort of the benign view of data collection, where the large players collect data, but they use it anonymously, meaning they're not targeting Kevin or Tracy. They're just looking at the consumer.
Yeah.
Male, age 45, lives here, works there.
Yeah.
What are his habits? What's he buying? What's he shopping? That seems benign. But then, is there a possibility with all the hacking that goes on that there actually could be silos of information about each person, and that somebody could hack a system and then find out every website you've ever been on in your life?
Yes, I feel
or in the past 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah, these are the things that keep people up at night, I feel. So this will be an interesting area to keep monitoring and to see like what goes on. Right now, as an investor, as we've said, it's mainly like the big cap companies here.
And I mean, Congress is probably going to come around to calling back, the heads of these companies, Satya Nadella, Jeff Bezos, Tim Cook, because even Apple's involved, and make them answer for certain things. But I think that as consumers, we also need to demand that, hey, we need more clear privacy policies on all this stuff that can watch us and track our data.
Yeah.
Because this isn't just about when I go voluntarily online. This is about the Internet of Things tracking my movements throughout an entire day in my house or in the city.
Yeah. But there also, I feel like, has to be some more regulations about the hacking that, there might have to be whole task force. There is a computer task force at the FBI right now, but I'm not sure how much they handle. If someone hacks in and starts my house on fire because they hacked into my smart toaster or something like that, that would, you're going to need whole different kind of police enforcement. I'm kind of obsessed here
Sounds
with
like an
the
insurance
hacking
liability thing too.
Well, that too. Yes, there's going to be a whole. Yes, there is. There's going to be that whole side of things too.
So if somebody like Google can't say, "Hey, we're in this big data business," but we're not responsible for anything that happens.
Right.
I don't think that's legit.
Yeah, that goes back to my earlier thing. Who is going to be responsible if someone hacks in there and destroys my property somehow? I don't know. These are some interesting things, but that's the lawyer in me coming out right there. But let's recap some of the tickers that we talked about today, because they're mostly the ones people know, but there might be good for a refresher here. So there is Alphabet, of course. They own Nest. Their ticker is GOOGL. Microsoft is MSFT. We have Amazon, of course, AMZN. NVDA, they're making a lot of the chips for this, NVDA. IBM, that's kind of a surprise one to me on here. I don't often think of them. IBM and GE might want to wait until that spinoff actually happens on GE Digital, but right now the ticker is GE, but it will have a new name and ticker. And then there's Cloudera. That's the smaller data side of this issue. CLDR is the ticker there. Is that everything? I think that covers all the big guys. Okay, so we'll be talking about this some more as we go along, because by 2021, there's expected to be 25 billion smart devices now, and there's 14 billion right now. So not quite doubling, but it could by 2021. So this is going to be, we're going to hear some more of these stories as we go along, as people adjust to using all these devices.
And there'll probably be a new medical diagnosis for some new form of migraine caused by all the RF chips sending frequencies across your brain.
Maybe. I don't know. That's a whole other thing too. Yes. So you definitely want to subscribe to the podcast here at Market Edge so you don't miss a single episode. We are on every week bringing you stocks and interesting topics here about what's going on out there in the investing world. So you can subscribe on SoundCloud. You can get us there every week, and also on Apple Podcasts. But be sure to get us somewhere. And I'll see you again next week with some more stocks.